General Assembly Denver, where I teach user experience design. I am currently the UX Product Advisory Board Chair for GA internationally, so I'm helping them write and structure some of the new curriculum that my school is teaching, and am the co-founder and senior lead dad to Quinn, alongside my wife Katie, and our two cats, Jen and Dominic, perhaps my most ambitious role to date. Also, I fucking love VR, and I have a feeling like maybe you're here because you also fucking love VR. I was actually going through my old stuff at my dad's house about a summer ago, and I found like a VR helmet I had made out of like a Kleenex box, like a shipping crate. I was like so excited about the idea of it. And so of course, as soon as it became something that could be done, I wanted it really bad. So, reasons VR is cool. Number one, this is Batman. I am Batman. This is from Arkham VR. You're able to put on the cowl and then dance in front of a mirror. You're supposed to look at yourself really seriously. I chose to dance. It's very fun to be the Batman. Reason VR is cool number two, it is opening up a whole new paradigm for design. It is giving us so many new, terrifying options of things we can do when it comes to design. But first, before I can get into VR, we need to talk about affordances and heuristics, specifically a brief recap of the Industrial Revolution, plus better living in post-war America. Now, that's what you guys came here for, so let's start with that. This is a frying pan. Perhaps you're familiar. So, when we discuss the way that we interact with objects, digital or analog, in UX, we talk first about two things, heuristics and affordances. Every object that we design has something called an affordance. In this case, it's the handle. We can look at the handle. If you were an alien and you crash landed here, you'd at least know this is the part you put your hand on, right? An affordance could be a doorknob, it could be a lever, it could be anything that when you look at it, you know that's something I can interact with. Heuristics are learned patterns that come from using these elements over and over again. So the affordance is grabbing the handle. The heuristic, affordances are intrinsically obvious and it doesn't need instruction. Heuristics, on the other hand, do need instruction. So you put the frying pan over the fire and it cooks the food inside of it, right? That is not something you would normally know how to do unless someone showed you how to do it. Now, in the beginning, we created the frying pan and it was fine. It had an affordance, it had a use, but there was one big problem. Yes, it gets very hot and then you touch it and you drop it and it hurts. So we did this and we kind of figured out this is fine. We have the frying pan, we put it over the fire, we're gonna need some sort of cloth in order to grab it, and it's okay, this is just how we live, nothing's perfect. Then, and this is a mass simplification for anyone super into American culture, we did this, made a bunch of factories, we did some of this, had a big war, and then at the end of it, we came out of it with a post-war economic boom where we had more money, more ability to spend on things, and we had better materials and better manufacturing processes as a result of the gigantic industrial push that came from World War II. So we were no longer asking, could my kitchen possibly have a microwave or a toaster? We were asking, what fucking color do we want that shit in? We had so many options when it came to building things. We could make whatever we wanted. So we did things like this. Oh yeah, we can make a frying pan that has a wooden handle. The wood doesn't conduct heat, therefore we don't need little grabby things when we go to pull it out of something hot. Amazing, right? What we saw from this point on was Frank Lloyd Wright, Noguchi, all of these amazing designers who figured out how to better and better make industrial goods, our interactions better and better, and they got so good. For instance, does anybody want to guess what this is? This is a fucking toaster from 1920. I assume you plug it in and lay your toast against the radioactive barbs. Try not to kill yourself as you remove it. This is the scariest toaster I've ever seen in my life. Now, roughly 100 years later, we can either digitally print our toasted faces or watch it burn to death in a glass cage. It's pretty amazing. So, long story short, we do all this amazing shit, we make a whole bunch of cool stuff, and then we invent computers. And we as designers go, what are we supposed to do with that? You see, we got the computer, and you can't touch it. You got a mouse, I guess, and it's close, and it just doesn't make any fucking sense. Years and decades of industrial design, nothing makes any sense anymore. The main problem here is that computers are a completely new design paradigm and they don't have affordances or heuristics. There is no tangible interface. If you were to walk up to a computer in the 1980s, the only thing that would be familiar is the keyboard. That's the only thing, and that was if you worked in an office job. That's probably the only thing you ever interacted with before. The mouse is fucking wild. I know that we all take it for granted now, but the fact that you move a block around in your hand and it moves the thing around on the screen, the fuck are you talking about? That is crazy to our parents and their parents' generation. And there's no obvious points of interaction. We got the keyboard, we got this, but we were used to consoles where you pressed buttons, where you moved machines, where lathes cut wood. We weren't used to moving a file and dragging it into another digital file and things become together. And as far as heuristics go, we had nothing to relate this to. There was no relatable previous experience that was anything like using digital tools. There were no familiar patterns because we had just fucking made it. And no understanding of what it does or what it's even supposed to do. Unless you were a programmer, which was a very small percentage of people at the time, you didn't even know what the computer was supposed to be doing. So how are you supposed to know if you were doing it right? So we made a lot of stuff like this. I don't know. We tried. We just kind of like fucked around for a little bit and we made some things. But then, after decades, we have things now like the Apple Human Interface Guidelines, we have the Google Material Design, to gigantic cultish mentalities of how you should structure the design of your apps. And we have this semblance of competition, and we're slowly refining it and making it better and better. But then there was fucking VR. Now we have VR. Now, the VR handsets themselves, you're living in a foreign city. We got knobs, we got buttons, we got triggers. We got the new ones that like they snap to your hand. You can let go of them, right? Like it's fucking crazy. And if you have any gaming experience whatsoever, you're also living in the Southern Metropolitan District of heuristics. You know the joystick is walking. You know the trigger is going to be grabbing or shooting something. We know what these buttons do. For instance, super hot. Pick up a gun, shoot a guy. Oh fuck. Oh god, you're gonna shoot this guy? Oh man. We have digital control, so you can stop and look at the middle finger. This is art. This is the highest form of VR. I don't know why we're talking here. You can even look out from the frying pan, making a heuristic analysis inside of here. Oh, scoop it. There we go. Yeah. That's the old and the new together. So, all our problems are solved forever. Thank you for coming to my talk. I'm just kidding. We don't know what the fuck we're doing with VR. I know that how many people have used VR? Like put on a headset, played around a little bit. All right, so I don't think anybody can deny that the experience is exhilarating. It is really cool when you have a great experience inside of it. But I have a few comparisons I want to draw. So for instance, this is a clip from Doom VFR, Doom Virtual Fucking Reality. If you remember Doom, they were like, what if it was in 3D and the demons ran at your face? Wonderful. This is exactly what I wanted. So a lot of what I'm going to show you here are captures from me playing games and me forcing other people to play games. So this is what happens when you put on the headset and you start Doom VFR, released in 2017. That this sound works. All right, we got the Bethesda logo. Fuck, it's so close to your face. All right, I'm excited. I can see my boundaries. Oh, that's pretty cool VR. I'll give you that. It's still super loud. I don't know why it's like that. Okay, we got, I guess these people made it. Cool, we got some logos. I hope that's not important. I'm trying to walk closer to it. I can't get any closer. Okay, we got a little pointer. Gonna click that, and I'm going to, I guess, pick a save. Okay, I delete that one. Gonna do that. Gonna pick out a new. This is like standing at McDonald's and ordering food. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. I just signed up to kill demons in virtual reality, and I'm standing there going, I'll take one of these. Don't get me wrong, it's visible, I can read it, but this doesn't work for me. It doesn't make me feel immersed. It doesn't make me feel like I'm about to kill demons and zombies, right? I want to compare this to the opening of Doom, the original that came out in 1993. First of all, I want to see that in VR. That's sick. We get one pop-up. This is when you knew your mom could never let you see you playing this game. This is hardcore. What the fuck is happening? Now this person idles on the, can't believe that on this screen for a little bit. But suffice to say, you get a loading screen, and then boom, you're in the fucking game. You run around, there's demons, you just shoot shit. There's no anything. As a kid, I was just like, what the fuck is happening? You load up the game, it has scary metal font, and then all of a sudden there's just a dude running at you, got a gun. That was immersion, and it was on a fucking 800 by 600 square pixel image. That to me was immersion, and they didn't even have VR. So the point I'm trying to make is that VR can offer immersion, but only when the UI is designed for immersion. I'll give you a few examples. So this is a scene from A Trip to the Moon in 1902. This is one of the very first movies made. And if you notice, look at where the camera's placed. It's up a little bit. You can see the floor underneath what appears to be a stage. This is essentially the angle your mom used to take videos of you at your Christmas recital, right? When we invented cameras, all we had were plays. We decided there should be movies. So what did we do? We're like, point at the stage. Point the camera at the stage. There you go. You got a movie. We didn't know about moving the camera, about cutting on action, the idea of long takes. This was day one. We're just like, point it at the stage, get it on film. It wasn't until 1962, and now the exact time that people cut on action the first time is up for debate, but a very good example is Dr. No. After 60 years of iteration, we learned to, while action was happening, move the camera, cut to a different scene. Oh, yeah, let's wait, there we go. Cut, right? And this looks cheesy as hell. At the time, this movie made people nauseous in the theaters. They're like, what the fuck? How many people are filming this? It was insane at the time. The idea that you would switch direction while people were in the middle of doing something. You take that and compare it to Ip Man. This is after 106 years of iteration. We have one of the best martial art films I've seen, in which we have multiple viewpoints. Multiple cuts. We don't feel lost at any point. Alright, so the problem is that VR is leaning on previous design patterns. The same way that we laid on stage production when it came to VR, we're leaning on this idea of past patterns in order to make VR work. Most notably, game menu UI. So this is from Doom, the console game, 2016. You notice what they did is they just took the menu selection and put it in VR as a giant poster. They didn't rethink any of the UI. They're just like, boop, there we go. There we go, it's fine. The other thing we're borrowing from a lot is cinematic camera blocking. One of the cool things about VR is that you can move around to a degree, depending on your rig, a couple steps, a couple feet, but the idea of trying to frame action in a really cinematic way. The only problem is a lot of times I'm standing over here and I hear dialogue and I'm like, wait, where the fuck are they? And it doesn't inherently adhere to the fact that we are random players who are experimenting. We're not necessarily looking for narrative action. Maybe I found a cool thing in the corner I'm gonna go play with. So, what we need to do is create a UI standard for VR in less than 106 years. That's what I'm going for. I would like to live to see decent VR integrations. What we can do right now is we can observe some use cases to identify good and bad patterns. There's my water. So being a designer, I decided to take some heuristical analyses of people that I was able to get to play video games in front of me. My first heuristic evaluation is my dad. He is 66 years old. He has severe rheumatoid arthritis, so movement is limited. I think a lot of times when we design for VR, we're not thinking about universal accessibility. We're thinking, what would a cool 22-year-old want to do with a VR headset? I really wanted to see how my dad moved in VR, and if the idea of embodying someone who didn't have severe arthritis would change his interactions. I made him play Super Hot to be extra mean, and he does not play video games. So he has no experience here. So I give him a task. We inserted ourselves into Super Hot, and the first thing you have to do there is insert a floppy disk into an old school computer so that you can start playing the game. So we were at the start menu. We are not in the game yet. What I failed to realize is what, to me, felt like a weird, retro, 80s, 90s vibe was just like the office my dad worked in. And so there was a very different set of heuristics going on in his head as he played. So let's watch my dad try to insert a floppy disk. Oh, it's not working.
Not quite.
Reach your hand out right in front of you. Like do
Oh.
Okay. A little bit further away. So take one step forward. And then look down and see. Oh. It's really not letting you, is it? So, here's the problem. First of all, the camera was set up wrong. Human error, but here's the fact. If you're in a VR rig, you don't know what the camera's pointing at. You don't know where you're standing. The idea that you could address and troubleshoot issues while inside of VR is non-existent. As far as he's concerned, he's moving his hand over the floppy disk and it's going right through it. Nothing's happening. Also, nothing was going on with the floppy disk to let him know that it was interactable whatsoever. There was no clue what was or was not able to be interacted with. This is the problem, is unless we're going full like Ready Player One, and our full body is integrated, we don't know what affordances are real. We don't know what can be interacted with. Obviously, the game doesn't want you to pick up the mod of the computer and smash it into a wall. That would really proceed to get in the way of progress, right? So without full body integration, it can be really hard to figure out what those affordances are. And in terms of heuristics, VR can create realistic environments, but that can be more confusing if we can't touch stuff that we're used to being able to pick up and move around. So the main problem is, can I touch that? It's a huge problem in VR. If you guys remember watching like cartoons in the 80s, yeah, I know what's about to explode. It's the one thing that doesn't look like the other stuff. In most modern games, this is from Dishonored 2, as you move over different interactable objects, you're going to get some sort of highlighting, you're going to get like a tooltip to let you know you can do stuff. Obviously, that really gets in the way in VR, and you're like moving your head like crazy, so we don't really know what we can do. For instance, what part of this game is interactable? That was kind of blowing my cover there.
Like the best dude.
Yeah, the ping pong table isn't real. It's a very common problem. So you can see from a UX perspective, I'm used to being able to lean on tables and open doors. They're not fucking there. There's nothing you can do about that. So how am I going to know what I can touch and what I can't other than don't lean on tables? If the VR immersion is working well, you should forget that you can't lean on tables. You should feel immersed. So we fixed the camera. We got my dad back up and running. And this is what happened next here. You were a secret agent, and okay. I'll let that load for a little bit. So, what we might actually do is just cut to a little bit. It's going to take this long to load. Basically, what's happening is he has inserted the floppy disk, and the most notable part is that he wasn't sure what he was doing with the floppy. Once he had it in his hand, he was moving it closer to the input for the floppy disk, and it started to vibrate. He got haptic feedback that let him know that he was interacting with something, and that trained him that yes, he was doing the right thing. Now, he's never inserted a floppy disk into a computer that then began to vibrate, but in the game context, he knew that something was about to happen. But what didn't go so well is what happened next. After he inserted the floppy and he began to look for what was going to be his next point of interaction.
Even though the floppy wasn't actually inserted.
Some excruciating load times here. We get that.
The floppy was inserted.
Okay, there's haptic feedback that told you you're making the right decision.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, what do you think happens next? All right. Oh boy. There we go. That was only one glass of whiskey. That was pretty good. Both. All right, so normal heuristics resumed after the prompt and the camera fix. Haptic feedback reinforced that decision. Now it was time to put on the headset. This is even more confusing. You're wearing a headset, but in the game you have to put on a headset to be in VR. When I did that, I thought it was a funny little thing. My dad is fucking lost. He has no clue what's going on. So it's not helped by the fact that the game doesn't give you a lot of great instruction on what you should be expected to do next.
I need to fire a computer somewhere look to see what's on the flop. I would imagine,
Okay.
yeah. And so.
And I'm going to let you just kind of solve this on your own.
Okay. So, let's see what's on the flop. I think I would need to hit a keyboard.
So my dad's looking for a keyboard. To do what? You're holding joysticks. Like, what are you gonna type on the keyboard that's going to do it? But here's the thing. He is used to these old computers. You insert a floppy, you go to the keyboard, and you start interacting. He looks down, and there's no fucking keyboard there. He is stuck, and he has no idea what to do. So what we learned from VR is that some heuristics are going to be dead ends. We are in a fantasy world after all, but what's hard is that magical realism point where we're in something that feels realistic, but then it starts to diverge and go in a different direction. Also, heuristics can override instruction. The entire time he's looking for the keyboard, 3 monitors are flashing instructions to put on a headset, which he is not reading. He is trying to figure out how to access the floppy because that's what he's used to doing. So giving someone a direct order in a game where they feel like they know what they're doing can be immediately ignored. So, one design insight I was able to pull from this is that we need to anticipate familiar heuristics, we need to expect that people will act on environments as they're used to, and we need to either embrace that or subvert them loudly. Not having a keyboard is a quiet subversion. It's literally a missing piece of hardware that we don't know what to do with, right? What we could do instead is embrace it by having a keyboard and, I don't know, maybe you put your hand on it and it's like, that's the correct password, what do you know? Or a loud subvert, a broken keyboard, something that shows him, oh, yes, I would normally interact with the keyboard, but it's broken. Then we're getting into puzzle game territories. It's like, okay, keyboard's broken, what am I supposed to do? If we really needed help, we could even put a little post-it on to let them know, Dad, please just look up. It's not like people are used to going to an old school tower Dell computer and then putting on a fucking headset. These are things we need to be taught. We have to do loud subversions. In Trover Saves the Universe is a game developed by Justin Roiland, who writes Rick and Morty and does the voices of Morty and Rick, the name of the show. So a classic problem in VR is movement. Fluid movement is really hard. It makes you very dizzy. Even in Doom, you're not running around in first person. You're using a teleport stick to go to different places on the map and then just rotating. This is subverted in Trover Saves the Universe by the fact that you are a race of people called a Chairorpian who are bound to chairs, and you can't walk. There, problem solved. It doesn't have to be crazy elaborate. In fact, you can see he's holding a PlayStation controller, and it's literally like a race of people that are just like you sitting on your couch playing a game. I decided to go one step further. I did a heuristic evaluation with my friend Jeff. He is 40 years old. Notable conditions, he is 4 bourbons deep as we start this evaluation. This is exactly where I wanted him. Yeah, he played Job Simulator. I did do some Beat Saber with him that didn't make it because he was actually surprisingly good at Beat Saber. And as far as gaming experience, he stopped playing around PS1. He loves Resident Evil. That's about where he got to. I asked Jeff to load into Job Simulator, which is a perfect, realistic recreation of making human jobs. It's not. It's an absurdist game. It takes place in the future, and you're in a robot museum, and they have games for you to simulate what it was like to be a human, and they're all ridiculously wrong and very fun. So Jeff is working as a gourmet chef, and I've asked him to simply make a sandwich.
Was that fun?
All right, so Jeff highlights a problem with the experimental player. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do whatever I want. You're going to put me in a fully functional kitchen and just tell me to make a sandwich so I'm not going to mess around? No. And it's important to remember that user action is skewed in a consequence-free environment. When I don't think that anything bad is going to happen to me, I will just play around. This is something that came to light in this wonderful clip. So this is an interview from DICE 2013 between Gabe Newell and J.J. Abrams about the problem of player choice in narrative games. So let's watch just a Hot second of that, if it plays.
I also feel like what you're saying is actually a problem that I have in games sometimes, where players are often driving the scene in the wrong direction. Rob, you have that clip, that Half-Life 2 clip? The lab. Can we just play that real quick?
Oh my goodness. Gordon Freeman. It really is you, isn't it?
I found him wandering around outside. Bit of a troublemaker, isn't it?
We owe a great deal to Dr. Freeman, even if trouble does tend to follow in his wake. I must say, Gordon, you come at a very opportune time. Alex has just installed the final piece for our resurrected teleport.
I can't take any credit for the breakthrough, Doctor.
Nonsense. Your talents
It's
surpass.
fun to throw something.
Let's just see if this thing works, okay?
Well, is he here? There you are. Man, Gordon, you stirred up the hive. We can't keep him here long, Doc. He'll jeopardize everything we work for.
He's coming with me.
That's right, Bonnie. This is a red letter day. We'll inaugurate the new teleport with a double transmission.
So you've got a story going on, and then you got characters teleporting shit and throwing things at people. It's like that sometimes the focus wants to be on the story to allow for setup, to allow for inevitability. And I think that when people are just walking around shooting things and exploring, it can be fun. It can be.
So that's one of the major problems we have, is that when you put people into a VR environment, they want to learn by doing. And it very rarely, oh, no, not share. I'm so sorry. All right. People want to learn by doing, and you have to experiment. If you do any sort of narrative pacing, it's very hard. If you were watching like a cutscene in a game, you're sitting quietly with your arms folded, or maybe there's like a quick time interaction. When you're literally standing there next to someone and they're acting like they're in a Shakespeare play, and you're like, fuck is happening right now? It gets very jarring. Case in point, Arkham VR. I'm sorry for how dark this is. It is Batman, so everything has to be fucking pitch black the whole time. But what's happened is me and Robin are trapped in cages by the Joker, and we are slowly having water filled up, and it's very clear to me that this was a puzzle, and I immediately saw a glowing cog on a wall, and so I grabbed it with my bat gun thing, and I'm trying to hand it to Robin, but he's not done with his fucking monologue yet.
Okay.
This is me shaking
It
in
looks
space.
like some kind of gearbox, but I'm missing some cogs. Let's find them.
That's right fucking here, man. And then he puts out his hand. Take it! Fucking take it!
Great. We're getting out of here.
It felt so bizarre to just have someone standing across from me and acting out a play that I was not handed a script for. No idea what is supposed to be going on, or am I supposed to be like thinking about it slower? In Trover versus the Universe, because they had a sort of absurdist comedy bent to it, they could really just skip a huge amount of this. You get to talking to a lot of NPCs that are kind of droning on. You don't really care about what they're saying about, so they put in a pretty clever editing tool to allow you just to speed through some of the NPC conversations that would otherwise be very boring. If this wouldn't load.
You're a heartless monster. It's bad enough you have the two dogs. Now you're hanging out with a purple walk person. It's unchair-like, It's against the chairman to walk. Man, I don't have time for this bullshit. I got a motherfucking sword. You said me off? I ain't afraid of you. Come on, let's do it. I'll turn on the news. Just like you, old man. Up. Pick it up, Uncle. Just stop hitting me. I turned on your work nose. Don't hurt me no more than that.
As soon as you walk away,
Haha, you fucking cowards!
so pretty much every conversation in the game can be skipped by pulling out the sword and hitting someone you want to stop talking. It's a wonderful mechanic I wish existed through a lot of the Final Fantasy games. It was awesome. So, design insight number 2 is we need to rely on experimentation as a core mechanic. People are going to need to look around to figure out things. So VR requires users to rediscover affordances and heuristics, because we don't know if the ping pong table is real, if anything anywhere is real. Users are going to discover by doing things, so you either have to create a forgiving, consequence-free environment, or give extremely strong indications of how those will affect the world, any decision you make. For example, Jeff maybe mightn't have done this to the kitchen if there had been some sort of countdown timer telling him that he was running out of time to do something. Maybe not Jeff, but most users would be motivated to act faster even if we don't know what this means. What is it counting down to? Doesn't matter. So, the first first VR UI pattern that I was able to synthesize here is when we combine embracing familiar heuristics in anticipating experimentation, we get integrated UI. It is our first actual thing we can point to as something that needs to be done. For instance, of all the ways to leave a game, I love the way Job Simulator does this. You summon a briefcase that has a burrito inside of it, labeled exit, and then what else are you gonna do? You're gonna put it up to your mouth. Yep, and then really is written in rice, and if you eat it again, you leave. I think that's a perfect metaphor for leaving the game. It's 100% integrated into the actual gameplay, and you're not having to look at a weird floating menu. If you play Super Hot with someone, you're going to see them doing this a whole lot. That's because part of the vibe of being a secret agent is that you're disposable, so if you want to quit out of a mission or go back to the main menu, you shoot yourself in the head with the gun you're holding. Problem solved. Very on theme. I love that. Trover versus the universe, you're asked to nod up and down, left and right a lot, so it does actually feel like you're answering a question. But perhaps the best version of this is the work that Boneworks is doing. Boneworks is a studio that now they're just making a game called Boneworks, and it's a lot of shooty, pew stuff, but the way that they're dealing with physics is honestly incredible, and they're actually
The
focusing.
goal is that anything you see, you should be able to interact with and touch the way you think you could, with a few exaggerations of like force pull, etc., like that, to make the virtual world better.
Let's say I want to slide my right hand down and grip hard with my left hand, slide my right hand down, but grip hard with my right hand.
Whoa. What's in there? Whoa! That's so cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah, everything's got mass.
Nico's a weeb.
Wow.
Whoa.
It's crazy force pull that thing.
Wow, that works so much better than it did Together VR. What?
Jeez, you man.
Oh, that's so nice. It's weird holding on to things, but actually holding on to things.
Yeah, you got used to it really quick. I'm glad.
Nice.
Throwing items in VR is always difficult because you're never sure what the release point's going to be. You don't know if the angle of attack is, and it's all like calculated.
So,
Like, oh,
that's what VR should be doing. Within 5 minutes, you're going doing stuff. And what they pointed out there too was really good. In Super Hot, you can throw ninja stars and stuff, but you're never sure where the release point is. They don't have mass or weight. The idea that you have to throw something very hard if you actually want it to go, incorporating physics into it is exactly what we'd expect. So his quote here, anything you see, you should be able to interact with and touch the way you think you could. It sounds simple, but that is something we've yet to achieve in VR. I know there's a lot of physical limitations of the actual mechanics, but it's not impossible. This is our first actual VR design pattern. So, Super Hot gets this exactly right. This is why this is my favorite game to strap people into. Once I've had a few bourbons, and I'm like, you want to see something? Down the basement. It's okay. It sounds weirder than it is. I got a secret. So, Super Hot is not only extremely visually simple, it's color-coded. White is the environment. Anything that's white, you can't interact with. Red is the enemy. Anything that's red, you want to kill. Blue, anything that's blue you can pick up, and as you move your hand closer, I wish this worked with the floppy disk, but as you move your hand closer, you get zebra stripes on it so you know that you were hovering over that piece. And that's why my 66-year-old dad with rheumatoid arthritis can play Super Hot. And this was a really fun moment. I introduced Secret Agent Dad. Now, I'll give you another hint. You're a secret agent, you kill everyone.
Oh, okay.
That was surprisingly easy for him. Oh, okay. You might have to take a sip for it. Ooh, there you go.
Wait.
Oh my gosh. So, what was great about this is that afterwards I'm like, thanks Dad, I'm done. He's like, I can do it. I'm gonna beat this level. And he just wanted to do it again and again for like 30 minutes until his body gave out. He's like, I have to sit down. I'm like, yeah, I figured. But he was so excited to keep playing it. That to me is a perfect UX experience. This is not a person who ever thought, yeah, I'd like to play a VR game where I shoot people, but he was so into it. So, you're probably thinking, how can I do this? Seriously, this sounds fun. I want to design for VR. All right, I have some tips. So there's a few frameworks right now that are enabling us to design for VR. The first is going to be Mozilla A-Frame. This is for web VR. So if you're designing something for Google Cardboard, but also Oculus Rift, Samsung Gear, this is going to be a very low to the ground. It's not going to have the best visibility because obviously the screens aren't optimized as much, but you can get there. And if you wanted to prototype in it, that would probably be the easiest way to get something off the ground. We have Daydream VR, which is sort of that mid-range, works with mobile phones only. I don't know a lot of rigs and particular software that use this, but hey, it's out there. And then we have Unity VR and Unreal SDK if you're going for the high-end headsets, including PlayStation VR, Oculus, HoloLens, Vive. These are harder to develop for, and I'm going to move on to that in just a second here. Designing for VR, Beginner's Guide by Blake Huddleston is where this came from. I'll make sure you guys can link to the deck or anything. You can email me afterwards, but that was a great article. I got a lot of info from. So, as far as design software, boy, do we not know how to do this yet. I've done a lot of research into if my students want to design something for AR or VR, what is the easiest way to get started? And right now we have a gigantic chasm between designing in Sketch or on paper versus moving it into VR. Actually putting it into the headset and testing it requires developers, it requires a lot of testing abilities, and as Alex Schwartz, the CEO of Alchemy Labs, are the ones who made Job Simulator, they said, you can never know how good something's going to be in VR until you try it out with a headset, with your hands, and it either clicks or it doesn't. That means the fastest you can iterate is the best for development. We're not going to sit down and write a game design document because it's going to be wrong. We just have to try it out in VR. This is super bad news for UX designers. This means you will have to be on a cross-functional team. You will have to be either with a developer or developing and being able to prototype it live as you're going. There's lots of tricks and tools once you get into that. There's all sorts of like import libraries for objects, but it's really hard to do without the hardware. I have a bunch of resources. UX of VR is one of my favorite spots. There's this one dude who's just making an entire like PhD thesis around UX inside of VR. He has tons of videos and information there. This is where I got a lot of my information. Then just to conclude, here's Jeff drinking an entire bottle of wine.
It's wine, drink it.
I was like, all right, that's all that I have. Thank you. Any questions, comments? You want to hear me talk more about things? You want to join my class? You want me to come talk at your place or something? Drop me an email, or you can find me at nickanderson.rocks. It's a work in progress, but I have a contact form up there. Do we have time to take questions?
Yes.
Yeah, no one's stopping me. All right, great. Hi, Michael. Haven't seen you yet today. Any questions that I can answer? Another stirring success. Michael, what's up?
So this has been a lot of game stuff, but how, I guess, far along is VR with the web? Like, just people.
VR for web. So we have other industries besides games using it, specifically industrial design. So if you're building a trade show floor for Samsung for CES, you're not going to go out to a lumberyard, make a bunch of things, and then have the CEO walk through and be like, nah, put them in different places, right? It's better to do a VR prototype. It also works really well with real estate, the idea of being able to virtually view a space that you don't have the ability to travel to. As far as web VR, the fact is you need some sort of device, some piece of hardware to get it up onto your head. And so until everybody, not only, because like app development became a lot more popular once everybody had an iPhone and we just knew that it was a thing that was going to happen. Until we know that everyone is going to have a VR rig, there's not a lot of non-game development for it, unfortunately. Matt.
So does that mean there's not a whole lot of people building a lot of VR games because it sounds very expensive to prototype?
It's super expensive to do in a prototype. Generally when you have, so for instance, Wolfenstein, they made a bunch of these new reboot games. They did make a VR game. It's short and very much on rails. That's about where I'm seeing it. Most of the time when we have VR productions, at least for games, these are big game studios that have the money and the staff to throw into VR, and they're the ones leading it. So it's coming from a game developer perspective. And in that viewpoint, the game development of the VR games is only going to be as strong as the UX design was in the console games. So if Wolfenstein has a great aesthetic and they're very good at designing user interfaces, we'll probably see that carry through into the VR game. But if not, it's even harder to propagate that. So Yeah, we do see some VR, and I mean, there's lots of people, especially on Steam, who are doing indie game devs, but we don't have like a monolithic development environment like we do for console and PC games or for apps or anything like that. Hopefully that'll change. What's up?
What are some of the initiatives that they're using it for accessibility?
So, whenever, I mean, honestly, this gets into a realm of what is universal accessibility in analog and digital. So, on one hand, we have the digital accessibility of color contrast and closed captioning for the hearing impaired screen readers. Then you add on top of that physical things like some games you have to stand up for. Not everybody's capable of standing up. What does that mean? So I don't know that anybody is specifically advocating for universal accessibility inside of VR yet, but I do know that, you know, testing with various people, there are a lot of issues that we need to encounter. So I don't know exactly who would be in charge of that at this point or who's leading the charge.
Do you see learning how to do UI for things like AR as being a stepping stone to VR or being a completely different set of principles?
I mean, they're very similar because you're going to be using the same tools of 3D modeling and spatial reasoning and stuff. I think that AR is actually going to be harder because with VR you 100% control the environment. With AR you're controlling parts of it but also trying to anticipate and figure out what's going on in surfaces, which is why you can, like, on Pokemon Go, catch a Pikachu through like a glass window because it doesn't understand what glass is. With VR, it could write rules that say stop at the glass or something. So they're both hard for completely different reasons, I would say, but learning about the 3D modeling and prototyping is a good way to get into either one of those. Any other questions? Andrew kind of almost has one.
It's split up into a couple different questions.
Okay.
Similar to the way of like how the high-end DVD war was won between HD DVD and Blu-ray, do you feel like it needs to come down to like either a killer app or who does VR best, or is it just won by supposedly the porting companies choosing like who actually won that war? And kind of second part to it, who do you think has done VR best out of the makers?
Yes, so there's two components here. One is the hardware and one's the software. So if you're to talk hardware, I think Oculus still has the best VR rigs, or I would say maybe the Vive since we have like the larger camera setup, but it's definitely not PlayStation VR, I can say that, and it's not Google Cardboard. I think more so than that, the best software that I've seen has been through Steam and any sort of PC, Oculus, open kit development. But the biggest piece, I think, is going to be who gets VR headsets in the hands of everyday Americans. I think this is how Apple won in the 80s when we started switching to, when Mac started becoming a primary use case. It's basically how we got Internet Explorer as our default browser, is that's the one that got into people's hands. Eventually, there's going to be someone who creates a VR rig that appeals to the modern consumer, not just gamers and edge case investigators, people that are super into emerging tech. And when that happens, that's when we'll see the switch. It's the same way that I stopped pirating music when Spotify made it easier to pay for music than to steal it. That's going to be a turn that comes at some point where VR technology is easy enough and cheap enough where people are like, well, why wouldn't I have that? You know, Amazon Alexa was the same way. At first it's like, I don't need a talking robot in my house. And you're like, oh shit, $30? Yeah, no problem. Right? So at some point there is going to be a cost shift where people do have them, and whoever wins that, whatever platform, whatever SDK they're using, that will be the winner, is my guess.
What's the price range of get one now?
Well, I did all this on PlayStation VR, and for that it was about $500 for the VR rig, but you already have to have a PlayStation. The new Oculus Quest Go, I forget. Quest, okay, that one is like $500 or $600, and that does not require a PC connection. It comes like with its own little rig. I haven't done that much investigation, but if you want like a true high quality experience, you're talking like $1,000 to $2,000 for the rig, plus you have to have a badass PC to run it. So the investment is going to be steep right now. And you kind of need a VR room, which is not something at least my wife was very excited about. So it's a little bit of a tough sale in terms of space. What the Oculus Quest is doing really well is that you set it up wherever, and I don't know how it fucking works, but there's no camera pointed at you. You can just stand in a parking lot and be in VR. And that's a huge space-saving technology, but it's still not the most powerful.
Yeah, tough shit, but
yeah, tough shed would be the way to do it. Yeah, very Ready Player One, like in the back of a van would be exactly right.
So I'm just curious, I use VR a lot for robotics and research at my job, but I'm just curious on the robotics side of things. Is this something you've seen a lot of usage with for robotics?
That is one thing I've totally not investigated. So I'm sorry, no info there.
It's all good.
So you were talking about like how people don't tend to follow instructions in a consequence-free environment. But you were also talking about the need to experiment in a consequence-free environment in order to find out how things work. How do you balance those two out?
That is a great question. So it's going to be mainly a question of theming. In a game like Trevor versus the Universe or Job Simulator, literally nothing means anything because there's no consequences. You can do whatever you want. There's not permadeath. There's nothing like that. In Arkham VR, you can not save Robin, and then your character drowns and you go back to your last save point. As we get further into more consequence-not-free, more consequential environments, it's going to be harder, right? So I think right now it's easier to make an experimental sandbox playground game in VR than it is to make something that's actually conducting some sort of narrative or sociological importance. It's hard to convey things of any sort of on-rail importance, which is why we see a lot of open-world video games that aren't on rails in general because they're more fun to play around it. So the balance has to come with how much you can tell someone to do something versus how much they're like, I'm here to play a game, versus I'm here for productivity, I'm here for my job, I'm here to design robotics, something like that. So I don't have an answer on that.
So it's more about what your intent is.
Yes. So if my result is have a good time, it doesn't really matter if people are following instructions or not. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I'll hand her the Mario controller for the Switch, and she'll just run Mario into lava over and over again. She thinks it's amazing. Best thing she's ever done, right? The more you're trying to accomplish something, for instance, Beat Saber, which is a really competitive game where you're like dancing and moving and trying to hit blocks at the right time, the minute that you accidentally, the camera screws up and your hand moves, you're like, oh, and you get so mad about it, and you're like, fucking controller's not working. That feels really bad, and I can only play that for a little bit because I get super competitive about it, and then if my camera starts to mess up, it's not fun for me anymore. So it has to be something that is complete levity, or we get into a really tricky gray area. All right, well, I'll stop it there, and I'll hang around for a bit if you guys have questions. But hey, thank you for listening to me talk.